if we were to do it over, would do this. We would buy a group of varying ages if you're a startup producer. Okay. Because we bought a bunch of calves and it was chaos for a year and a half until everybody got sorted out. And in turn, I would buy some younger animals and some middle-aged animals so there's some leadership in the herd established quite quickly.
And one 18-year-old cow gives you 40
Actually,
pounds.
she was 13. I was corrected afterwards. She was 13.
Well, I have a question for all of you in turn, if you don't mind. In your mind, looking forward, what would be your priorities for dealing with CWD most effectively in the next 5 years? What would be your priority next steps? I guess we'd have to keep them down to a few. Catherine's already.
I've got
Give them the.
You don't want to guess at what I'm saying? I don't know if this is the best thing to do, but my thought is right now, the work that Trent is doing in the wild, and again, I'm only coming from this at a wild standpoint, but I hope we're all together in the problem solving here, is that congregation of the animals is the biggest spread, and if we can remove congregation of animals, we can make a big difference, whether that's baiting, but also our agricultural practices at bringing these animals in. Whether that means fencing grain bags, we can still allow them, but fence them or whatever it might be was step one. But the problem is still in the soil. So, Chris, you were talking about it's not in the soil ubiquitous across the field, but it is in the pockets, especially where these animals are congregating, that it's a problem. If we could find some way to treat the soil and get rid of it, that would be a big step, I would think, for a while. And then we could start to deal with from there, but I'll pass from there.
Okay,
Lane's got a question.
this time of year, one of the biggest problems is they're looking for a food source. So they congregate where there's a food source, not necessarily grain bags. Hay fields are a big concern. When you have over 600 deer in a 4-mile radius, and no way to fence them out, and the law doesn't allow you to populate, what do we do?
I think we've got to work together on those solutions, and you've got some very, very good points. And maybe what we do, I was talking out of the break there, that in the old days, well before, we didn't manage for populations. It was what we found on the landscape was there naturally. The density of deer that we have now in the wild is likely not a natural density. Maybe the idea is not to manage at the higher level that we are. Maybe we manage for a lower population, because maybe in the long run, that is a healthier population. When we talk about winter die-off and the huge die-off that happens in the winter, if we had lower densities, they might find the food and we're not going to have as big of a die-off. So maybe we change our management strategies. And again, I can only talk about wild species, or the wild animal, or whatever we're talking about.
Free ranging.
Free ranging, thank you.
They're all wild.
Yeah, but there are a lot of things that we have to consider, and we have to start talking about them. And I think you're bringing up some really, really good points. And it makes this whole thing so complex, because there's no easy answer.
Do we need free-ranging deer all over the province?
That's a pretty tough question. It depends on who you ask. You could ask somebody else, do we need captive deer anywhere in the province? And you might get a different answer.
Well, the obvious is like we're growing food for the world, and the obvious economic factors of the way we're managing our wildlife right now, especially if this is going to pass the humans, means that having deer on cropland is, we can't even sell Roundup Ready canola.
Catherine, let me try.
Okay.
Is there a social license to not have wild deer all over the province?
Not yet.
No. So it's not, you can't present a wildlife manager with an impossible solution.
And I understand, but we have to start the discussion somewhere, like, we have to do something.
Maybe we,
Saskatchewan is only half uninhabitable, lots of room for you.
maybe we have them on the landscape, but maybe we maintain them at a lower level. And I've given this example several times today, and I know you've seen it because you've seen it in your field, with grain bags driving out, and I stopped counting at 70 deer that are around those grain bags. If those animals are spread over a field, you're going to have a lot less concentration of the prions in that soil. At a specific spot where they're poking their nose in the same hole to get the food, you have a lot higher risk. So what can we do? There are a whole host of things we can do. Let's pick a few that we can try. That's what Trent is trying now. So he's in the field, he's got these animals marked, he's working with the landowners in some of these areas. He's trying to reduce the congregation, so working whatever way there might be to reduce the congregation of the animals on private land. And then from there, maybe we implement, these are small areas, and we're trying some of these management tools to see if we can impact and change the prevalence.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I give it a try. I mean, I think it's very much a very big difference if we talk about the free-ranging cervids and the captive cervids. And I think for managing the farmed animals, so getting a sensitive test as early as possible and weed out infected animals would be a good plan to reduce the shedding and the contamination of the land. And I guess what we heard from Texas, it seems feasible to do all those live testing and to detect positive animals early. So maybe this would be a push towards the regulatory offices to approve a test, be it RT-Quick or be it IHC for the biopsies, for the rectal biopsies or whatever.
That is such a difficult question. I tell you, one of the first things I like to see done is to come up with an end game plan when you get the positive. The uncertainty that we have in Texas, and I'm sure it sounds like it's the same all the way across the landscape, regardless of borders, what have you. The animosity, the friction between captive and free ranging, I feel like I have allies in this room. We do this because we love it. It's a way of life for a lot of us. If you go back, my daddy graduated from Texas A&M University with a degree in wildlife science, and I think he probably flipped his grave if he knew what I was doing on the family ranch. He was raised in a different mindset. Accepting that we live in 2018 and things are different than they were 100 years ago. Quite frankly, I'd like to go back post-Civil War days and let me walk down the street with my coat on and you get in a confrontation and whoever's got the quickest hand wins the fight. I like 7 things that way. Unfortunately, that's not socially acceptable anymore. That's why it doesn't go on. And I'd be practicing a whole lot. But I think acceptance that CWD exists, it's always going to exist. I mentioned my teeter-totter thing. I wonder what would happen if we went ahead and let it. Does anybody think that the good Lord Mother Nature might be able to handle this better than we can? And just let it play itself out and see what in the heck happens? The problem is we use this sky, I call it the chicken littles. We approach it with the skies falling that, when CWD does come around, it's devastating. I've seen the computer models that show that it's devastating. Like I said, I think it's something we don't want. I think we ought to do things to mitigate getting it. Unfortunately, some people still going to get it. But what happens when you do get it? What is the end point? People, I'm speaking in my region of the world. People down there are less likely to want to test for it if they don't know what the result's going to be if the test comes back positive. And so have an end game and not the scarlet letter. Oh, he's got CWD. Let's say, okay, if it happens to end up in my breeding pens or ends up on my ranch, that's okay. Don't come burn my ranch down. Give me a method to continue on in the family business to live with it. You know, if I happen to lose a leg, it may be crippling, but I get to still have a chance of walking, even if it is with a limp. And let that be the same thing. So what is the end point when a positive gets found? Because as we notice across the landscape, how many more, let's go in the last 2 years, how many more states have come up positive just in the last 2 years? You know why that is? Because we're freaking looking for it more now. I think it's been around some of these states for a whole lot longer than what we know and haven't seen the effect of it, or we're turning a blind eye to the effect of CWD. But what's the end point when it's found? And let God and Mother Nature take care of things.
Yep. Just a comment that I would make would be that we can have all the debate and discussion we want about regulatory change and things that are happening in the regulatory environment and even with testing and research and so on. But at the end of the day, I think the people in this room are the key players. And when I say people, with no disrespect to our veterinarians here, but I'm talking to you, the producers. I think you are the key players in this story, and you have a responsibility to be part of the solution. And we tend to overlook that, I think, sometimes. And, you know, the strength of our industry is so often based on our entrepreneurial spirit and the fact that we're all individuals. And we tend to operate as individuals. And often that means to varying degrees of compliance, and I don't necessarily like the word compliance because that implies regulations. But what I mean by that is that you are the solution in this room. As producers, you have an obligation, in my opinion, if I could put it that way. You have an obligation to be part of a solution to deal with this issue. So if the regulations are, you can like them, you can love them, and you can hate them, whatever you want. But from my perspective, you have a responsibility to do everything you can to manage and mitigate the risk of contracting CWD. And I don't believe that as an industry we've necessarily done a good job on that. And we talk about, let me give you, not to eat up too much more time, but just let me give you the example of screenings. How many farms, and I don't want anybody to put up their hands, but we know how many farms have been feeding screenings with fecal matter in. We know that's a problem, and yet people continue to do that. Are you contributing by doing that to being part of the solution, or are you just heightening the problem and creating the next high-risk situation? And I'll just, without going any deeper, I'll just stop it there. But my answer is leaving the science to the science and the testing to the testing. My answer is directed at you, because I think you're all part of that solution. And if you're not, then you're a problem.
Could I make one more comment to Catherine's point? You're probably aware this is how we dealt with TB in Manitoba, was reduced concentrations of animals and feed sources and access to feed, and that was the number one part of the strategy. So I 100% agree with you. That's got to be a priority. Even though I hate it, I love feeding deer.
You're going to keep talking when cautious too.
Okay, thanks.
I don't know if there's any science to back it up, but to expand on your screenings, I think water source is huge as well. I think having a concentrated herd drinking out on fenced natural water, especially if it's flowing in from the outside. Nobody's going to want to hear this, but I think it's a bad idea. I think that is one route of transmission. It's also not, in any livestock practice, real healthy to have your animals wandering around in your dugout.
Well, as most of you probably know, in Quebec, if you have that type of water source on your property, it's been a requirement to have it fenced off for the last number of years.
And that is one of the new requirements
Yeah.
of the volunteer certification program as well.
Why would I help?
Try that again, Greg?
So just the water sourcing issue has been addressed in the new VHCP. If the flowing water not, but if there's standing water that bridges the fence or that has access by wild cervids, it has to be restricted.
It's a biosecurity recommendation, but it's not legislated. Not in the new VHCP, unless you are reading a different document than we are in Alberta.
Okay, I have to double check, and that was my understanding.
It was a consideration during the development process.
Yeah, sorry, I was on the working group and it went back and forth quite a few times.
It makes common sense, you're correct, Graham, it makes common sense, but, you know, the whole idea of, you know, screens and where you're locating feed from, the whole works, everybody's debate is great. You know, the one thing, the challenge I think, Scott, you're gonna have in Texas is the fact that there was too much backbiting and fighting between the wildlife groups and the game farmers. And to be candid, there was a lot that the wildlife agencies could have done to help themselves. And, you know, she's right, exactly correct, but Saskatchewan's had baiting forever and haven't nipped it in the bud. There's been, these carcasses move all over. You know, we've got First Nations hunters that can cross borders and they can move carcasses all over. And they've been very prevalent in Alberta. You can have all kinds of guys come from all over Alberta and Saskatchewan, hunt down at Suffield, and they can scatter 500 elk through one hunt on a weekend all over the countryside. But your biggest challenge is going to be to encourage your wildlife agencies in them two endemic areas to nip that in the bud. Alberta's mismanagement of the problem is they managed for trophy mule deer opportunity, and they wouldn't harvest enough mature male mule deer. And Marco Paiva stood here last year and told us all that the male mule deer are spreading the problem in Alberta, and yet they still haven't done anything about it. They haven't changed their tact or their approach. And the guys now in Alberta, the reason they test all their mule deer is because it takes you 8 or 10 years to get drawn. It's like winning the lottery. But if you happen to find a mule deer that you just shot, that's a 200-inch muley and he's positive, and you test him and he's CWD positive, you get a brand new tag next year. So it's like a double win. And, you know, the problem is...
Sound like CWD's a good thing in that situation.
Well, for the hunters, they love it. I mean, my buddy last year, he shot a male mule deer down by Czar, and it was positive, and he spent a whole month hunting a game because he won the lotto game. They replaced his tag.
So how do you propose it? You bring up a very, very valid point. And, you know, I sure didn't come this way to add to the problem of the animosity between regulatory and industry. But I do have an issue with, and I'll call it hypocrisy, because I think that's what it is. So when we get a positive CWD case out in West Texas, it took forever to impose carcass restrictions. But when we got a positive in a breeding facility, they shut us down overnight. I'm a certified herd. I was shut down for 58 days. Thank God it was a point in time in the year where moving a deer wasn't a big thing. How do you make a governmental agency accept you or like you or just be neutral on you? Say, okay, it ain't your thing, don't do it, but don't tell me I can't. It's my land. I'll go as far as say they're my animals. We get caught up in these debates about, you know, like Barry brought about, you know, well, in Texas, the deer belong to the state of Texas. I'll be damned. You know, we've got a court case going on right now of ownership of deer in Texas, and the politics is coming into play here. We lost the first round. I say we the industry, are basically looking for a declaratory judgment of who owns the deer in captivity in the state of Texas. It's funnier I'll get out to me. I'm just a common sense kind of guy. I mean, I graduated in the top 75% of my class, so I'm not the smartest bird. But when I go out and pay hard-earned green dollars for an animal, and I don't own it, I mean, does that make any common sense to anybody? How about this? I sell that animal and I get somebody else's hard money, I put it back in my pocket to support my family, but I didn't own that animal. How about, I'm told that I'm allowed to possess these animals by permit for the benefit of the state of Texas. Okay, that sounds nice, warm, and fuzzy, but, so how in the heck did I benefit the state of Texas when I loaded up a trailer load of those animals and shipped them across the Rio Grande River into Mexico and got paid hard-earned greenbacks from some Mexican? How did that benefit the state of Texas? The only way it benefits is I spent that money in Texas. Why, when I went through a costly divorce, did I have to declare those as community property according to the legal system, but I don't own them? How did I go and borrow money and put them up as collateral? I'm going to go buy me a ranch. I'm going to put Big Bend National Park up as collateral. Go buy me a 10,000 acre ranch if you can use state-owned property as collateral. It's asinine. We need to quit that animosity that, wild is wild and captive is dirty, We need to stop that, and to each his own. And my belief is, one of the models we have there is hunt your way. I'm not a bow hunter. I have no desire to pick up a bow. But I ain't trying to take the bows away from those who do. I like to sit and stand with a cocktail, my 30-06. I'm good to about 400 yards, depending on how many cocktails I have. And that's my, I don't hunt to feed the family. I hunt to keep my sanity. And I don't know that I hunt. I think I sit and let them come out there and I pick one I want. Look at it for a long time and tip my cocktail up and don't usually pull the trigger, but we need to quit the fighting, quit the animosity. Tell me how to do that. I've gone in with the approach of here's my common sense and acknowledgement, that we need some regulation, let's be reasonable about it and all that. Instead of just getting more and more poured on us. The regulatory just keeps going more and more and more, to the point, honestly, now the only reason I'm still in the business is because I'm too damn hard-headed to say that they beat me and got me out. Because when I started off in deer breed, I had a folder this thick of regulations. My folder's this thick of regulations now. Same species, same issues, same concerns. It's asinine. It's taking the fun out of it.
We're all at the same stage, but unfortunately, you're still new enough to this in terms of the state that if you don't, you have to show them the other math and science in these other jurisdictions. I see what happened in Saskatchewan, I see what happened in Alberta, you see what happens in some of them infected states like Colorado. And if they don't nip this wild CWD problem in the bud, or absolutely stomp on it, I don't care what kind of liberal hunting seasons they have to reduce populations there, do everything they can, because if they don't, and don't create some of these where you can't bait anymore, and I noticed that Texas is fairly common, there's lots of bait stations and all that.
Well, it is not just common, it is the practice.
Amen. But if they don't stop some of this, you're going to go from 0.06 to where you're 30% in 20 years' time too. And then no matter what you do, if you think you're frustrated now, and we've all been at this where, we've been going on since 96 in Canada, I mean, we have to be twice as hard-headed as you, and you're just as rednecked as we are.
Thank you. I think that's a compliment.
But if you're around the elk industry, you've had to be hard-headed to stick with it. It's been a battle.
But the thing, and here's the thing, in South Texas, and that's mainly what the area that I hunt and the area that I hang around. If you do not bait, this is what is so hypocritical or controversial in the wildlife agency is about habitat management. Okay, that's their mantra. I get it. Without habitat, you have no wildlife. No one wants. I say that maybe some do, but I think the majority of people do not want to see a bunch of elk or white-tailed deer in paid parking lots with feeders out there with deer blinds or hunting stands, whatever, to hunt them. We want it to look natural, and even though it's behind a high fence. I tell people, I'm just pretending that I'm on the King Ranch. It's just my little bitty ranch. But I can sit there and pretend. You drink enough cocktails, you can pretend anything. And just let me do it. It ain't affecting you none. It ain't hurting you none. Just quit telling me that I can't do it. But without baiting, the population would be immeasurable. And so the damage to the habitat would be immense. So without corn feeders, I don't just have corn feeders. I have a corn feeder on the front of my truck 365 days out of the year. And every time I drive down the road, I'm spreading corn out there, bringing the deer in.
They proved that they didn't stop the disease from moving around at all. The disease is still spread, and maybe it was the hunters that spread it, I don't know. But
If they would have continued, likely they would have had the same success that they have in Illinois, but we did not continue. And in the retrospective analysis that they do in Colorado, so they're looking back on it because they had similar control, the same thing that we were doing. And they are finding that it would have been a good thing to continue. So in other words, just to say we still have the disease, we killed off a bunch then, it doesn't mean that that means it just didn't work and wouldn't work.
But there's,
And I'm not saying that's where we go, but I'm saying we have to put everything on the table and we have to be willing to take some risks.
I would have to disagree
And
that will be a
talk about it.
long-term study that will prove, because I will agree that you would be delaying the process. But that's all you can do, because unless it leaves the soil in a 10-year period or a 20-year period of 0 deer with 0 regression, then you can't say, because all you're doing is you're stopping it from moving for your lifetime or maybe mine, but the deer are still eventually going to return to that area and get seeded.
Maybe we work on a soil solution. That's where I was
Have you
getting
been to the
at.
sand hills? Have you been to the area to see the capacity of the land? I mean,
It's not everywhere. Like if this is CWD, it's not, the prions are continuous across the area, it's pockets.
no, I
Find
realize
the
that, but
pockets. We've got to find
It-
some
it
kind
is-
of solutions
it
that
is,
work.
I mean,
where we
the
do
soil
that.
is irrational. I have to break that one for
They
you,
are
because
in Colorado, found some research that does suggest there are some agents that they can put on the soil to actually get rid
Where do
of
you
the
start?
prions. The problem is what do you do, what does that do to our soil? We've got fungi, we've got all sorts of other things in that soil, and I don't know what sometimes you bring something else in to fix one problem, you create another problem. I don't know where that's gonna go.
And I don't either, but I just,
We know what's gonna happen if we do nothing, we have a good idea of it. Do we wanna take that risk?
I think, honestly, personally,
Sorry,
nature is
sorry,
going to have to sort this one out.
I'm sorry to cut you off because we're running on. We got one comment for one, and then we've got other things.
This is first Dr. Gilch. Do I say it right? I so messed it up, didn't I?
No, say Sabine, that's easier.
Sabine. I really don't know. But yeah, one of the things, that's been percolating around is if we had a better idea where it was on the landscape and to what degree we have it, as far as prevalence, and then it would help us maybe, when you're communicating to ag people or, to farmers, I think it would help them to understand as well. And I wondered about the fecal test. Is there a way we can use that to help us understand where it is in the province? But I'm just not sure, I don't know enough about deer biology and stuff like that, how you would do that so you wouldn't resample something twice, and it's the same animal. And I'm not even too sure, and the second part of that is like you were saying, environmental contamination. If we have the ability to test the environment, like we have some highly contaminated premises, we think, and they've laid fallow now, or they've just had bison or cattle in them for how long? 10 years, maybe more? It'd be really interesting to look at them. So what's your thoughts about using fecal testing as wildlife surveillance? I guess would be the first one.
Yeah, so actually the idea behind the fecal testing, that was mainly for wildlife, because this is the animals where we have least access to it, which are most complicated to capture and get samples from. So the idea was indeed to go out into the field, collect fecal samples, not to say this or this animal is positive, but just to get an idea whether this area has CWD. So it relates a little bit to, we test fecal samples as a surrogate, and the underlying soil might then be contaminated as well. The problem is probably you need a certain prevalence in a specific area to be able to detect CWD, to detect the agent in fecal samples. If you test a reasonable amount of samples, say if you have 0.5% or whatever, you would have to test a lot of fecal pellets. So in terms of whether you test the same animal as well, I'm not a wildlife person actually, but I heard that they can really distinguish from what deer species the poop comes, and whether it comes from a pile or you go and take single pellets in that respect. So.
And I think, for game farmers too, like you say, Blade, wherever Blade is gone, But yeah, you've got all those deer out in that, like, then you have a better idea, well, how much at risk am I in a, you know?
This would be an interesting thing if you asked me for a good idea. Find a way to do a 100% test on the wild deer population in Saskatchewan. Make it a mandatory thing for 1 year. In every single zone, every single elk, every single moose, every single
How
deer.
much money?
Find out the money to do it, and then you have a starting point. You wouldn't have to do the people testing either, or you could maybe work on that
They
in
never
the
asked
future,
us,
but.
from captive breeders, they never asked us, they just said, you're gonna do it. They didn't say, well, how much money do you have, or can you afford to do it? That's the part that I start having issues with. When it came down to the captive industry, to keep us from being a threat to the free-ranging animals, which I think we should not be a threat to them. It's like, here's your options. You either do it, or you're out of business.
Right.
It's real simple. But when it comes to the free-ranging, protecting the captive industry from the free-ranging animals, well, we ain't got the money.
You could use Wildlife Federation monies. I mean, they fundraise for this stuff all the time. I mean, this is something that they should be dealing with at your CWD working group. They're saying, look at how are we gonna, this is how many deer go to environment, how many whitetail tags are sold, how many mule deer tags are given out, how many moose. This is how many potential heads we're gonna have come in. We know what the cost is. It's gonna cost us $500,000.
What information is that gonna give you, and what are you gonna do with that information?
Well, for one, it would give you an accurate starting point, 100% accurate starting point, with no speculation as the prevalence levels throughout the whole process.
But I think, I mean, at
But
the
what do you
top.
do with that information?
Well,
Because you don't know which animals that you tested, because you ain't got a animal side test. It's gonna take you a week or two to get results back. And so then you come back with an information that, okay, now we know we have a disease in a given area at a certain prevalence right now, and what do we know from that? What's gonna get higher over time? What do we accomplish?
how do you respond with what Catherine was saying to it without knowing the numbers? How do you make an accurate or proper response? What should we do?
It's a sample size issue.
I know what you're saying, but the sample size, like.
You don't need 100%. If I wanted to see what the average height of a man is, you don't measure every man in the entire, all of Canada, and compare it with the height of
I
every
realize
single.
that.
It's the same thing. We don't
Same
need
with the
100%.
per number.
About nutrition numbers, statistical numbers.
We have
Give this number.
surveillance and we have management. And surveillance will tell us something, but what are we going to do with it? What kind of management action are we going to do? We can do nothing, that's a management action. Or we can, that's what we've been doing. We've been on a good track for understanding that.
I think we have to move on. Randy gets the last word.
Oh, good.
You're gonna love it. No favoritism, Randy gets the last word.
I'm going to look at you when I make this comment, because you've repeatedly asked, what is it that we can collectively do, or what can be done to move this whole project forward in the sense of the partnership between environment, meaning outside versus inside. The first thing, and the last comment I'll make on this, is that as long as the Saskatchewan Wildlife Federation has the ability and the authority to dictate who sits on things like the CWD Advisory Committee, because this group here has made repeated efforts to try to join that group and partner with the interests on the outside of the fence, and have been continually rejected. And as long as the SWF and their players have the authority to dictate who makes the decisions and who partners and who doesn't partner, this is going nowhere.
If I could just clarify.
No, I had the last
Are you going to tell the minister you said so?
They have no decision-making authority.
They have huge political
Huge influence.
Yes.
I used the wrong phrase when I said decision-making, but they have huge influence, and we know
Okay.
that.
I hear you, let's give it time and work on it.
Point made, point taken,
Yes.
and it's time for us to move on because we have another meeting to run yet.
Thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Everybody,
Everybody sitting up.
thank all the speakers.